At the far end of Clark Street, at a crossroads drowned in the gray rain of a bitterly cold October afternoon in Chicago, a ruthless Mafia kingpin slammed his palm against the steering wheel of his Mercedes, the hard crack of plastic striking skin echoing through the suffocating silence inside the car. Michael Reed was so furious he barely recognized himself, his breath heavy and uneven as if something inside him were about to explode. He had just received word that someone within his organization had betrayed him, and in his world, betrayal always meant blood. The red traffic light blinked like a taunt, its harsh glow washing over the angular lines of his face, carving deeper into the rage burning in his steel-gray blue eyes. Then suddenly everything stopped. The fury, the static hum of the radio, the relentless tapping of rain on the windshield like a funeral drum, all of it dissolved in a single suspended moment. Because across the street, beneath a flickering street lamp and a curtain of misty rain, a woman was standing alone, selling small, rain-soaked bundles of roses. Her hair was drenched, clinging to the sharp angles of her thin cheeks. The light touched her face, a face weary and worn, and Michael recognized her instantly. She was not a stranger. She was Elena, his wife, the woman he had buried 3 years earlier after a mysterious car fire that left him hollowed out and half-feral with grief. And now she stood there, alive, holding a child in her arms. A little boy with soft curls and eyes so familiar they chilled him to the bone. His own eyes. Michael's entire world collapsed in silence. Every truth he had forced himself to bury, every ghost he had convinced himself was gone, rose from the dead, and he knew that the empire he had built with blood and brutality now stood on the edge of ruin. Not because of a coup, not because of the police or an enemy syndicate, but because of a love that had never truly died. The rain fell harder, as if the sky itself trembled at what was about to unfold. The cold inside the car sharpened until Michael's breath clouded against the glass. He stared at her through the rain, the red light reflecting in his eyes and cutting into him like a blade. He did not believe in ghosts or demons, but now he was staring at a ghost from his past made of flesh and bone, holding the son he had never known existed. His chest tightened, squeezing the air from his lungs until he could barely breathe. All he could hear was the rain and the frantic thud of his own pulse. Elena did not see him. She bent down to smooth the child's hair, whispered something into his ear, then lifted her head again, offering another rose to a passing stranger. Her movements were still gentle, still unmistakably hers, but her shoulders were thinner, her eyes stripped of the fire they once held. She had been running, that much was clear, but from whom? From him, or from something darker in the shadows of the world he ruled. Michael could not move, could not lift a hand. Every muscle in his body had turned to stone. He wanted to throw open the car door, run across the street, pull her into his arms, and demand answers to the 100 questions roaring through his mind, but he stayed frozen. Because in that moment, what he felt first was not joy, it was fear, a sensation Michael Reed had not allowed himself to feel in years. Fear of the truth, fear that if she was alive and had not come back to him, the reason must be something so terrible he could not bear to imagine it. The driver beside him leaned close and whispered, "Green light, boss." But Michael did not answer, did not turn his head, did not blink. His gaze clung to the woman across the street, as if closing his eyes would make her vanish again. And then, in a voice hoarse with anger, pain, and something deeper than despair, he spoke a single word, "Drive." The car moved forward, slicing through the rain, leaving behind the intersection and the fragile image of a woman with a basket of soaked roses, and a child with his unmistakable eyes. Michael Reed sat rigid in the back seat, his hand still gripping the door handle as if letting go would send him running back into the storm, shouting her name. But he did not. Not because he lacked the will, but because he lacked the courage. For 3 long years, he had lived like a walking corpse, his soul buried with Elena the day flames consumed her car on an empty stretch of highway, leaving behind only a charred ring and a handful of unidentifiable remains. He had held that ring, knelt in the rain, and screamed like a wounded animal in the cold silence of the cemetery. He had vanished from public life, withdrawn into the shadows, and rebuilt himself into something colder, harder, unrecognizable even to his own reflection. No longer the man who knew how to laugh, to hope, to love, only the ruthless sovereign of Chicago's underworld. But now, with a single glimpse through the rain, everything he had, believed to be true, began to fracture. Elena was alive, and she had a child who, if he was not mistaken, could not be older than 5. Michael closed his eyes, trying to smother the storm rising in his chest. Impossible. This was impossible. Either the world had gone mad, or he had lived for years inside a lie crafted with frightening precision. The driver, silent for most of the ride, glanced nervously into the rearview mirror but said nothing. He was used to his boss's unpredictable rages, but this silence unsettled him. Michael slowly opened his eyes. Outside, the city blurred into an abstract painting behind sheets of rain. His voice came out low and rasped. "Where is Ethan?" The driver hesitated before answering. "At the office. Want me to call him?" "No." Michael turned his face back toward the window. He no longer saw the streets, only Elena and the boy. Every image cut like a shard of glass. The way she touched the child's hair, the way the boy clung to her arm. Those eyes, his eyes, cold, deep, always searching. It was no accident. It could not be coincidence. That was his blood. Theirs. Elena had not died, had not burned the way he believed. And that child was his son. The truth carved through his mind like a command, a truth too large to deny. But if she was alive, why had she not come back? Why had she let him drown in hell for 3 long years? Who had orchestrated this nightmare? Who was powerful enough, cruel enough, to stage her death so flawlessly that even he had been fooled? And if they had done that to her, they would not stop there. Some unseen hand had arranged everything, and that hand was still at work. Michael clenched his jaw, his breath sharp and uneven. He could not let emotion steer him. Not now. Not when a child was caught in the middle of this storm. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. After a few rings, a deep voice answered. Ethan Cole speaking. Michael wasted no time. "I need you to find a woman." "What name?" "Elena Harper." Ethan went silent for a single beat, enough for Michael to sense it. He continued before Ethan could ask another question. "She is living in Joliet, selling roses near the old train station. Find her, but do not let anyone see you. Do not approach her. Only watch." "Understood," Ethan replied quickly, clear. "Is something wrong, Michael?" Michael ended the call without a response. He leaned back, eyes closed, his breathing heavy and weighted like iron. For a brief moment he felt the rain outside was not nearly as cold as the storm rising inside him. Elena was alive. His child was alive. And if that was true, then everything he had trusted, everything he had paid for in blood and death, might all have been a lie. And the ghosts rising in tonight's rain were only beginning to take shape. Michael Reed did not sleep at all that night. He sat alone in his 3rd-floor office inside the Reed and Associates building, a place everyone knew was nothing more than a polished shell hiding the criminal empire he commanded. The city lights outside pressed through the frosted glass, casting pale streaks across his face, like cold fingers tracing old scars. The rain did not stop, falling with the heavy insistence of a sky trying to empty itself of every secret he was about to confront. On the desk before him lay the scorched wedding ring, the only thing recovered from the accident 3 years earlier, the one in which they told him Elena Harper had died. Michael turned the ring slowly in his palm, the metal so icy it bit into his skin, though he barely felt it. His mind spun in circles around the image of her standing in the rain, her thin coat clinging to her body, her face hollow but still carrying a faint, stubborn light. And the child, the small boy with tangled curls and gray-blue eyes that mirrored his own. There was no denying it. That child was his. He knew it by instinct, by blood surging loud and hot in his veins. Those eyes did not lie, he remembered. The days when Elena was still alive, when they were still husband and wife, when every morning she made him coffee and sat on the balcony reading while sunlight turned her reddish-brown hair into a soft halo. They once dreamed of a child, but he had always refused, insisting his world was no place for innocence. He never knew she had been pregnant. Perhaps she hid it from him. Perhaps she was afraid. Or perhaps she knew someone was watching. Too many questions crowded his mind, each one cutting him deeper than the last. The office door opened softly. Ethan Cole stepped inside, rain clinging to his hair, his long dark coat heavy and silent like he had just walked back from a graveyard. Without a word he set an envelope on the desk, then straightened, his eyes avoiding Michael's. Michael picked it up, opened it, and looked inside. A series of photographs lay within, all taken from a distance. Elena standing on a street corner in Joliet, beside the abandoned train station. She arranged roses in a worn basket, her gaze lowered, her expression tired but calm. In another, she crouched to tie the little boy's shoelaces. The child stood beside her, wide-eyed, unafraid of the world around him. Michael paused at that photograph. The boy smiled, cradling a single red rose, the angled light brushing his young face and illuminating the unmistakable eyes. That moment pressed into Michael's chest, like someone setting a stone inside him. He tightened his grip on the photo, afraid to breathe. Ethan's voice broke the quiet, hoarse and low. I watched her for 2 hours. No strangers approached. She sold flowers, then walked the boy back to a small boarding house near the Iron Bridge. Michael nodded faintly, his gaze still locked on the image. What is the boy's name? Ethan shook his head. I did not hear anyone call him. Michael fell silent. A child growing up in a city full of traps, with no father, no name, and a mother living like a shadow. He stood and moved to the window, staring down at the blurred trail of headlights, sliding through the endless rain. Each drop that struck the glass felt like a repeated question in his mind. Why? Why did Elena choose to leave? Why let him bury her? Why take his child and vanish as if she had never existed? And if it was fear that drove her away, what kind of terror had forced her into hiding? Michael turned back, his expression dark. You are certain no one else was near her? Ethan nodded. Michael said nothing for a long moment, then murmured, Keep watching. Do not let her see you. And no one, absolutely no one, can know about this. Ethan left, and the room fell into silence once more. Michael returned to the desk, lifting the photograph of the boy again. Those eyes pierced straight into him, a truth he could no longer turn from. His blood, his child, was living in the dark. And for the first time in years, Michael Reed felt something stronger than rage. He felt fear. Fear that he was about to face the one thing he had avoided all his life. The truth. Michael could not tear his gaze from the photograph. He set it down, only to reach for it again moments later, as if he feared losing the fragile thread connecting him to the life that had once been his, a life stolen from him before he even realized it existed. The boy did not only have his eyes, but the same quiet, unsettling way of watching the world, as though he already knew too much in a body far too small. Michael had carried that same look, and now it lived again on his son's face. Son. The word felt foreign in his mind, a sound abandoned so long ago it almost startled him to hear it echo back in his own thoughts. He believed he had grown accustomed to loss, to betrayal, to death itself. But nothing had ever taught him how to accept the idea of a child raised without him. Not because he rejected the child, but because he had never known he existed. And now the truth was no longer buried. It was pounding against his chest like a brutal, unforgiving drum. Michael rose and walked to the steel cabinet where he kept old files, secrets the world would never see. He pulled out a worn leather folder containing everything that remained of the crash 3 years earlier. Photos of the burned car, the inconclusive DNA report rendered useless by extreme heat, police statements claiming the brakes had been cut, and finally the scorched wedding ring recovered from the wreck. He remembered standing in the storm that day, wind tearing at his skin, when someone handed him the ring in a cold, transparent evidence bag. He had not demanded further testing. He had not looked for more proof. He had not questioned anything. He believed the story because the alternative was too painful to survive. And now, looking at the pieces again, he realized how foolish he had been. A crash with no identifiable remains, a wife who vanished without a trace, a ring with no real proof beyond memory. All of it was too perfect, too clean, too neatly tied, together, as if crafted by a professional hand. Someone staged Elena's death, and that someone was close to him. A chill crawled up Michael's spine, cold and predatory. He carried the folder back to the desk and spread out each page, every detail now slicing through his memory like a sharpened blade. At that moment, his phone buzzed softly. A message from Ethan. She is on the street again. The boy is with her. I will follow. Michael read the message and locked the phone without responding. He did not trust himself to react. He needed time. He needed control. But his mind was unraveling. For 3 years, how many things had happened behind his back? How many enemies had he killed believing they were to blame? while the real architect watched from the shadows, quietly amused. If Elena was alive, if the child was his, then the foundation beneath his feet might be nothing more than sinking sand. The more he moved, the deeper he would fall. He leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling lights as if answers might materialize from the cold, white glow. A thought struck him suddenly, sharp enough to steal his breath. If Elena did not die, where had she gone? Who helped her disappear? Who could construct such a flawless illusion of death right under his nose without leaving a trace? It could not be an outsider. It had to be someone within. Someone who understood the organization, who predicted exactly how he would react. Someone who knew his only weakness was Elena. And if that person was still alive in the dark, then she and the boy were not safe. Michael jolted upright, his eyes hard as steel. He opened the safe, pulled out his familiar handgun, and checked the magazine. He did not know when he would need it, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He once believed Elena was dead, and that belief had killed him. He would not let it happen again. Not when the truth was still festering beneath the soil someone had tried so carefully to bury. Michael stepped into the basement room, where no one else was ever allowed to set foot. There were no windows, only the harsh glow of cold fluorescent lights and rows of metal cabinets lining the walls. This was where he kept the things not even Ethan knew about. Not money, not weapons, files, forgotten pieces of a puzzle, handwritten notes from the days when his foster father was still alive, names, amounts of money, transactions that, if they ever fell into the wrong hands, would blow his entire world apart. He searched the third drawer up from the bottom and found an old black leather notebook. The cover was smooth from wear, the edges frayed as if it had been touched thousands of times. This was the notebook his foster father, Vincent Maddox, had guarded like his own life before vanishing from the radar more than 3 years ago. Everyone believed Vincent was dead. The police had found blood in his room, but no body. Michael had arranged a funeral without a corpse because that was what was expected. But deep down, he had always doubted. Vincent had never been the kind of man who went down easily, and now that he had seen Elena alive, every assumption about death felt like part of a cruel joke. Michael opened the notebook, and the scent of old paper and leather rose up like a whispered reminder from the past. Pages and pages of dense handwriting filled the book, the script firm and precise. There were symbols he had never deciphered, funds moved through dozens of shell companies, names that had once been allies, once been enemies, and a few that still sat at the conference table with him every month. What made him stop was a small note, written in red ink, hurried and less controlled than the rest. Harper, it must not be allowed to return. Beside the line was a mark of 3 slashes, Vincent's private symbol for an absolute order. Harper, Elena, her name was in the book, in Vincent's list, and that line was not a warning. It was a sentence. Michael's throat went dry. Below the words was a date, marked as 1 week before the accident, so it had not been random, not an accident. Vincent had given an order, and someone had carried it out. That someone could only have been a trusted insider, someone close enough to know where Elena would go, what she would do. Ethan. The name flashed through Michael's mind faster than thought, but he could not be sure. Ethan was the only one who had stayed when every other trusted man had either betrayed him or been eliminated. Ethan was the one who had saved his life in El Paso, the one who had watched his back in negotiations with the Russians. But Ethan was also the man who knew Elena well, who knew every corner of the system. And he had once been the only person Michael allowed free access to this basement archive when Vincent was still alive. Michael closed the notebook, his gaze fixed on the red ink as if it might reveal the rest of the truth. 1 week before the accident, 1 week before Elena disappeared. If Vincent had ordered her elimination, then why? Because she knew something, because she had seen something she was never meant to see, or because she was carrying something he would not allow to exist. Michael froze. The child. It was not just Elena's existence that made her a target. It was the child in her womb, Michael's blood. A man like Vincent would never allow the future of his empire to slip beyond his grip. If he knew Elena was pregnant, that alone would be enough to mark her as a threat to be erased. Michael left the room, his heartbeat pounding like a war drum, his hand clenched tightly around the black notebook. He could not believe he had missed it for 3 long years. That in his own empire, under his own watch, The woman he loved and the child he had never held had been placed on a list of those who had to die. And now he knew. He knew who had signed that sentence. He just did not yet know who held the knife, but he would find out. And when the truth was dragged up from the cold ground, whoever had buried it would be the one forced to fill their own grave. Michael did not return to the office. Instead, he drove straight south, following the old route out of the city to a bar tucked away in the forgotten streets of Chicago. He did not turn on the car's interior lights, letting the darkness swallow the jagged thoughts stabbing at his mind. In his hand, the black notebook lay like a curse, every page heavy as stone, pressing down on his chest with a fury he had never known. He had lived his whole life in the shadows, but never imagined that what he had protected would turn and stab him in the heart. He needed answers, not from documents, not from hurried notes left behind by a man presumed dead. He needed the truth from the mouth of someone still breathing. The one person who might have known Elena was alive, and kept that secret. Ethan Cole was sitting alone in the corner of the bar, a glass of bourbon in his hand, the warm yellow light stretching his broad back into a long, tired shadow. He did not look surprised when Michael walked in. He simply lifted his eyes, gave a small nod, as if he had always known this moment would come. Michael said nothing at first. He pulled out the chair opposite him, sat down, and placed the black notebook on the table between them. Ethan looked at it without touching it, but a small muscle in his face twitched. Michael's voice came out low and cold as stone. "You remember this?" Ethan nodded. "Of course, Vincent's notebook. He never let anyone touch it, except you, right?" Ethan did not answer right away. He lifted his glass, took a sip, and set it down again, his gaze distant. When he was gone, I thought nothing in there mattered anymore. Michael opened the notebook, turning to the page with Elena's name. His finger rested on the red line. "Harper, it must not be allowed to return." Ethan stared at the words in silence. He did not deny them, did not ask what they meant. The quiet weighed more than any confession. Michael leaned forward, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. Why? He knew she was pregnant, did he not? Ethan gave a slight nod. Someone told Vincent. Someone in the organization saw her at a clinic. He lost his mind. He said if she carried that child, it would become a threat, a child with red blood that did not belong to him. Vincent would not allow anything beyond his control to exist. Michael's hands tightened, the veins in his head ready to burst, and then he ordered her killed. Ethan exhaled, his voice dropping. Not at first. At the beginning it was only surveillance, but when she disappeared for several days, he told me to find her. I did. I found her. She was in a small apartment near the Des Plaines River, her belly already large. I could not follow that order. Michael went still. His rage did not erupt into a shout. It settled into a deadly quiet. Ethan went on, his voice thick and heavy. I helped her leave the city, took her to Joliet, arranged a place to stay, false papers. Then I staged the crash, made a deal with the police, burned the car. I gave you the ring. The words slid into Michael's heart like a blade of pure ice. He remembered how he had gripped that ring until his palm bled, how he had held it when he buried Elena, how he had screamed her name in the rain like a man stripped of sanity. So all that time, Ethan had known. He watched Michael sink into the abyss, watched the torment eat away what was left of his humanity, and stayed silent. Michael stared at Ethan, his voice ragged but sharp as a knife. Why did you not tell me? Ethan met his gaze. Because if you knew, you would have gone after her, and if you found her, others would find her too. I could not protect all three of you. I could only keep her and the child alive. Michael did not blink. He did not tremble. But inside, something was splintering apart. He did not know what was worse, that Ethan had betrayed his trust, or that he had done it to preserve the lives of the people Michael loved. And deep in Ethan's eyes there was no plea, no excuse, no visible regret, only a tiredness that had been there for a very long time. Michael rose from his chair without another word. He left the notebook on the table and walked out of the bar, leaving behind a man who had chosen to carry the burden of all three of them. But as he stepped into the night, he knew one thing. Whatever the reasons, whatever the sacrifice, none of it mattered anymore, because now Elena was no longer safe, and if someone knew she was alive, then the child no longer had much time. The car moved through the night, its engine blending with the cold wind whistling through the narrow alleys of Joliet. Michael drove without direction, yet deep inside he knew exactly where he was going. The small rented room at the end of the riverfront street, the one Ethan had mentioned. A place with no name on the underworld map. A place meant to be safe, though for Dudley, Michael, nothing in this world felt safe anymore. He did not call ahead, did not warn anyone, did not pause to weigh right from wrong. In his mind there were only two things left: Elena and the child. The only things in existence he could not allow himself to lose again. When he reached the mouth of the alley, he turned off the headlights, stepped out with his gun concealed at his side, his gaze drawn tight like wire. He cut across an empty lot where an industrial plant once stood, now nothing more than broken walls stained by time. The streetlight flickered weakly overhead. The rain had stopped, but moisture hung thick in the air, making the night feel heavy and close. He halted when he saw the small wooden house, its front door shut tight, curtains drawn, no light inside. But he knew they were there, a certainty deeper than evidence. He approached, ready to knock, when a faint click sounded behind him. Michael spun by reflex, gun drawn, but too late. A shadow lunged from the corner, the muzzle flashing, and the first burst of gunfire tore through the silence like metal ripping metal. Window glass exploded, scattering shards across the ground like a spray of icy rain. Michael dove down the steps, dodging 2 more shots, then returned fire. 3 rounds hissed into the darkness behind the trash bins where the attacker had hidden. A groan sounded, then silence. But Michael did not lower his weapon. Pressing his back to the wall, his heart raged against his ribs. This was no robbery, no stray vagrant. This was a warning, or worse, an execution. He edged sideways, peered into the shattered window. Shadows shifted. A child began to cry, and then he saw Elena. She was crouched against the wall, clutching the boy, her eyes wide and terrified as she looked toward the broken glass. Her eyes locked onto his, and she froze in recognition. Michael. She did not say his name aloud, but her lips trembled, and the look on her face, the same look that had made him fall in love, years ago, was now carved with fear. Michael pushed the door open and stepped inside. Elena did not pull away, but she did not come to him either. The boy sobbed in her arms, his tiny hands clinging to her neck. Michael lowered his gun, his voice dropping, the gunfire gone, the fury gone, leaving only a trembling father standing before the one sacred thing he had ever been given in this life. "Are you and the boy hurt?" Elena shook her head, her lips dry and pale. "They came just now." "I could not do anything." Michael moved closer and knelt before them. The boy looked at him through tears, startled but not turning away. Those eyes stabbed into Michael again, making it hard to breathe. He touched the child's small shoulder, his voice shaking. "What is his name?" Elena swallowed hard and whispered, "Jacob." Michael pressed his lips together, pain and tenderness twisting inside him until it hurt to stand. "You should have told me." Elena shook her head, tears spilling over. "I was going to, but they knew. They watched me. If I reached out to you, you would have died. I believed that." Michael bowed his head. She had chosen to lose him in order to save him, and now she was the one hunted. He glanced around the room. A bullet lodged in the window frame, a shard of glass lying near Jacob's foot. No one would be safe here another minute. Michael stood, grabbed his gun. "We have to leave. Now. I have a safe place." Elena lifted Jacob into her arms and rose, but before leaving she looked straight into Michael's eyes. "There is something you need to know. Ethan knew I was alive. He helped me escape. He staged the accident. He hid everything from you." Michael stood still, not from shock, but from confirmation. He had already known, but hearing it from her felt like someone hammering nails through the coffin of trust. He said nothing, only nodded. Then he opened the door and led them out. The night swallowed the 3 of them as they slipped away from the house marked by blood and broken glass. But Michael knew this was only the first shot. The real war waited ahead. Michael brought Elena and Jacob to a safe house on the western outskirts of Chicago, once used to shelter high-level witnesses in the most dangerous operations. A small 2-story structure of gray brick, hidden behind towering oaks and a locked iron gate. No one except him and Ethan knew of this place. But now even Ethan's name felt like a quiet blade lodged beneath Michael's ribs. He drove without speaking, his grip on the wheel white and shaking, his jaw clenched as fury built inside him with every mile. Elena held Jacob in the back seat, soothing him, her gaze flickering toward Michael through the rearview mirror. She said nothing, because she knew Michael Reed's anger was a storm. But this was no longer the anger of a crime lord betrayed. This was the fury of a father who had watched his son nearly die at the hands of people who once called him family. When they were inside, Michael gestured for Elena to lock the doors, draw the curtains, and stay upstairs with Jacob. He walked straight into the small weapons room behind the kitchen. His hand slid over guns, knives, magazines, and with each weapon he touched, Vincent Maddox's face rose in his memory, along with the red ink sentence in the notebook. Harper, it must not be allowed to return. It had been 3 years since Vincent vanished from the map, leaving Michael to inherit the empire, the blood-soaked kingdom, the unfinished business. But now Michael saw the truth. Vincent had not disappeared. He had retreated, manipulating everything from the shadows. Elena alive, Jacob nearly killed, and Ethan knowing all of it, yet staying silent. This was no private secret. This was a declaration of war. Michael pulled out his familiar Glock, loaded it, tucked it into the holster beneath his jacket, and returned to the living room. Elena stood at the foot of the stairs, her expression a mixture of fear and resolve. "Where are you going?" Michael paused, his voice low and cold. "To find the ones who pointed guns at my child." Elena stepped forward and touched his arm. "Do not do anything reckless. They are still watching." Michael clenched his jaw. "I do not care. If they want a war, I will show them what destruction looks like." He had forgiven long enough, stayed silent long enough. But from the moment Jacob cried in his mother's arms, and Michael's own blood boiled inside him, he knew the role of a kingpin no longer mattered. He was a father, and no one had the right to touch what was his. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had not used in more than 3 years. A deep male voice answered after several rings, worn rough like old whiskey and smoke. Michael spoke plainly. "I need you to summon the classic unit. Meet me in 1 hour at Warehouse 5. Tell no one." The voice did not ask why, only replied, "Understood." Michael hung up and turned to Elena. "Stay here with our son. No one will find you, I promise." Elena held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded softly. When Michael stepped outside, rain began to fall again, each drop heavy as metal against the hood of the car. He was no longer the man who had stood alone in an office mourning a death that never happened. He was a father reborn the moment he saw his son's face. And he would not stop until the ones who dared touch his family were brought to their knees, begging for mercy. Blood would be met with blood, and this time there would be no negotiations. Warehouse 5 sat deep within the abandoned industrial district on the city's southern edge, a place that had once been the organization's primary distribution hub during the glory years under Vincent Maddox. Now it resembled a mausoleum more than a headquarters, coated in the dust of time and the long, heavy silence of things left behind. When Michael arrived, the rain still fell, his headlights stretching thin, uneven streaks of light across the cracked concrete. The metal door slid open with a grinding clang, revealing 3 men waiting inside around a worn wooden table. None of them spoke when Michael entered. He looked at each in turn, not in greeting, but in recognition. The first was Jonas, a former assassin who had vanished after a slaughter in Philadelphia. The second, Marcus, a weapons expert marked for execution by Vincent but spared at the last second by Michael. The third was Caleb, the strategist who had once mapped the entire northern pipeline. They were men who no longer owed loyalty to the organization, but who owed their lives to him, and he had come to collect that debt. Michael pulled out a chair, sat, and placed his Glock on the table. He did not waste words. "I need the 3 of you. 1 week, silence, no questions, no mercy." Jonas raised a brow but did not object. Marcus drew a long drag on his cigarette before crushing it out. Caleb spoke first. And in return, Michael held his gaze without blinking. "Freedom. No. Pursuit. Enough money to disappear forever. I wipe your names from every system." No one argued. In their world, Michael Reed's word carried more weight than any blood contract. Caleb nodded first. Marcus smirked faintly. Jonas followed. The pact was sealed, not by ink, but by the eyes of men who survived the dark. Michael spread out a map of the city. He pointed to 3 locations. One was Vincent's old office, where he had entertained international clients. 2 was the Western Warehouse, now the new coordination center. 3 was the mountain estate where Vincent had once retreated each month. Michael spoke quickly, sharply, each word like a bullet. Vincent is not dead, he only pulled back. And now he wants to wipe out whatever is beyond his control. The boy, my wife, they are targets. Jonas frowned. Wife, boy. Michael did not explain. They did not need the details. They only needed to know the target was not a drug lord, but Vincent Maddox, the man who created everything and now intended to burn it down to rebuild it. Caleb narrowed his eyes. And Ethan, he is the only one left at your side. Michael's jaw tightened. Ethan will be dealt with after. The priority is protecting her and the boy. Marcus studied the map and murmured, if Vincent truly is alive and planning something, we will not have much time. He never waits long. Michael nodded. I do not need time. I need precision. We strike first, loud enough to drag him out. Jonas pulled a small device from his coat. I still have the code to track his old satellite link. If he is using that relic of a phone, we can find his location within a 500-meter radius. For the first time that night, a glint sparked in Michael's eyes. Do it. Caleb folded the map. 1 week. Then we disappear. Michael nodded. 1 week. No one knows you are alive. No one knows I met you. When Michael stepped back into the night, the rain had thinned, but the sky remained low and heavy, as if waiting for something to break. He knew. He had just forged an alliance with no road back, but he also knew that only men who had nothing left to lose fought without fear, and he himself had nothing left except a woman and a child trembling in the dark. Blood would spill. Death would come. But this time, he would not be the one burying bodies. The man who believed he still controlled everything would. The safe house where Elena and Jacob hid lay wrapped in a silence so fragile it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. After Michael left, Elena checked every window latch, every lock, then took Jacob upstairs and lulled him with the old songs she used to sing in the small house they once shared in the northern suburbs. But the melodies now felt as though they drifted from another world, a world she once believed she had lost forever. Jacob lay still, eyes half closed, but his hand clung tightly to her wrist, as if sensing the storm circling them. Elena brushed her fingers across his cheek, her heart tightening painfully. She could never have imagined Michael appearing like that, not as a memory haunting her, but in flesh and blood, with the same eyes yet a heart now carved by tempests. She had not expected him to find her on the very night she needed to stay hidden the most, and she never imagined the life she had protected for so many years would now stand at the brink of being erased by the very past she had loved and sacrificed for. In the kitchen, she wiped away the last faint drops of rainwater on the floor from the night before. The shards of glass from the attack remained etched into her mind. The gunshots, Michael's sharp breaths, Jacob's silent scream. She had believed that leaving that world behind would keep her son safe. But Vincent Maddox never let anyone leave. He never forgot, and he certainly never forgave. She remembered the night Ethan came to her. He had not hesitated. He had simply looked her in the eye and said, "You must disappear. For the child. For the child." Michael. Elena had believed him. He had helped her. But knowing now that Michael had been kept in the dark, that Ethan chose silence over truth, filled her with a quiet, cutting bitterness. He had stolen Michael's chance to be a father. And now, as everything unraveled, Ethan was the one she feared she could no longer trust. The kitchen light flickered once, then steadied. Elena startled. Instincts she thought had died roaring back to life. She checked the window again. Outside, the night was damp and restless, rain tapping the roof in heavy, uneven beats like a suffocating heart. Then she saw it. In the small backyard, something did not belong. A bouquet of red roses. Lying in the grass, no footsteps, no voice, no shadow. Just the roses, as if they had grown out of the earth itself. Elena opened the back door and stepped out, her gaze fixed on the bouquet. The night wind chilled her skin, tossing her hair across her face, but she did not brush it away. Barefoot, she crossed the damp grass. When she bent to pick up the roses, a small folded note slipped out. She opened it with trembling hands, 4 words written in smudged black ink. "His eyes are watching." Elena gripped the paper, a crushing tightness seizing her chest. She looked around, the trees swaying, the fence shivering in the wind. No one, but she knew. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. And this message was not meant just for her. It was a warning, or a threat. She rushed back inside, locked the door, pulled every curtain closed, and leaned against the wall, her heart racing. If Vincent had found a trace of them, if his men were toying with her like prey, then time for her and Jacob was slipping away fast. Roses, once her way of earning a living, were now symbols of a closing darkness. Flowers and shadows, blood and silence. Elena looked toward the stairs where her son slept, then tightened her grip on the note. Something was coming, and it would not arrive with guns alone. It would come, carrying a past that had never truly been buried. Michael's black car turned onto the red dirt road that wound deep into the northern pine forest, a place where sunlight never pierced the thick canopy and the air always carried the cold, damp scent of rotting wood. The cabin sat hidden in the heart of the trees, surrounded by tall pines like ancient spears guarding a buried secret. This was not a temporary refuge, but the last place Vincent Maddox had visited before disappearing from every system. A house with no address, no tax records, no trace on any satellite map. Michael stopped the car more than 100 meters from the gate, shut off the engine, and stepped out into the dimness. The shadows of the trees stretched long across the back of his coat, like spectral hands trying to pull him down into the earth. In his hand was a loaded Glock. In his chest, a knot of turmoil burned through every shred of reason. If any truth still existed in this world, it lived inside that house. He walked slowly toward it, each step falling on the bones of memory. He had been here years ago when Vincent still treated him as a rightful heir, when they sat by the hearth discussing strategy, loyalty, and the things never written in any ledger. Back then, Michael never understood why Vincent kept this place so isolated. Now he did. It was where he hid the things no one was allowed to know. The wooden door opened without a lock. Dust cloaked everything inside, the smell of dampness mingling with the faint scent of old ashes in the fireplace that had been cold for years. Michael entered without turning on the lights. The thin gray glow from the windows revealed everything exactly as it had been left. The familiar armchair, the old tea table, the unfinished book resting face down on the armrest. He moved to the fireplace, knelt, and ran his fingers along the stone beneath it. After several minutes, he found a narrow groove and pressed. A small click sounded, and a section of the wall released, revealing a hidden compartment. He reached inside and pulled out a small black metal box locked by a code. He entered 3 numbers, Elena's birthday. The lock opened. Inside lay a portable hard drive, several small notebooks, and a stack of photographs printed on film. Michael lifted the first one, his hand trembling. The first image was of Elena, taken weeks before she disappeared. She was exiting a prenatal clinic, an ultrasound document in hand, her expression tight with worry. A figure followed her at a distance. The next photograph showed Ethan speaking to an unidentifiable man, the two of them standing outside the apartment where Michael once believed Elena had died. Then came an image of Vincent, sitting in a dark room, signing a document Michael instantly recognized as an authorization for a purge. These photographs were not merely evidence. They were confessions whispered from the shadows. Michael looked at the hard drive, knowing it might contain names of the disappeared, the manipulated, and the deals that never saw the light of day. And among those names could be the one Vincent had planted beside him, the one still watching him, the one who might be dangerously close to Elena and Jacob even now. Michael packed everything into his bag and walked out, but he paused at the doorway. The cabin, once Vincent's hidden throne, was now nothing but a hollow corpse of decayed power. Yet the secrets buried inside were still alive, and bringing them into the open meant placing his life on the board. But he had already lost too much. Elena had lost 3 years living as a ghost. Jacob had been born into hiding, and now it was his turn to drag everything out of the dark, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Outside, the wind howled through the pines like the sighs of restless souls. Michael walked faster, clutching the hard drive, eyes fixed on the car. There was no time left for hesitation. The real war was about to begin, and it would not be for vengeance alone. It would be to save the last untainted piece of himself. Jacob. Ethan sat alone in the dim room on the upper floor of a small hotel at the edge of the western suburbs, far from the noise and further still from the trust he once held. In front of him sat a watered-down drink, a thin stack of documents, and the empty chair where Michael had once sat countless times before. Tonight, that emptiness felt like a chasm. Ethan knew he stood at a crossroads with no path back. He had chosen betrayal, though not for power or gain. He had chosen to protect Elena and Jacob. But he had never imagined Michael would uncover everything. The look Michael gave him the last time they met haunted him still. A blade that did not slash clean, but carved deeper with every passing hour. Ethan had believed he could withstand that look. Believed silence was the only way to keep all three of them alive. But now he no longer knew what was right. From his inner pocket he drew a small USB and set it beside the glass. It was a copy of the hard drive Vincent kept in the forest cabin, the original now in Michael's hands. Ethan had been ordered to destroy all data if Vincent ever fell, but he had hidden it instead. Not out of betrayal, but because his conscience had not died completely. Inside were records of black market dealings, lists of embedded operatives, and, most importantly, a plan called Reconstruction, a strategic purge of every person ever connected to Vincent but no longer loyal, including Michael. Ethan knew that now he either gave this USB to Michael or let himself be swallowed forever by Vincent's machinery until no trace of him remained. But he also knew that if he handed it over, blood would spill. Not only that of enemies, possibly his own, possibly Elena's, possibly the child's. His phone vibrated softly, cutting through the silence. A message from an unknown number. Only 2 words. It's time. Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment before turning it off. He stood, slipped the USB into his coat, and left the room without looking back. Below, a black SUV waited, the driver wearing dark glasses despite the night. He said nothing when Ethan climbed in. They drove through the empty streets like ghosts, searching for one another in the dark. When they reached the meeting point, Ethan realized he stood before the final choice of his life. The safe house where Michael sheltered Elena and Jacob sat quietly among the trees, its lights glowing faintly as though the house itself breathed carefully measured breaths. Ethan did not knock. He stood in the rain, gripping the USB, staring up at the window where Jacob's room cast a dim light. A strong wind tore at his coat, but he did not move. His life spread out before him like a chessboard where every piece had already been placed. Either he walked inside and did the right thing, or turned away and lived as a hollow shadow until the end. The door opened before he touched it. Michael stood there, eyes deep and unreadable, no weapon in hand but the look he carried sharper than steel. Ethan said nothing. He simply held out the USB. Michael did not take it immediately. He studied Ethan for a long, heavy moment, then nodded once. Not forgiveness, simply the acknowledgement that, though far too late, Ethan had still chosen the side of light. And sometimes, that alone was enough to begin the final act. The living room glowed under a pool of soft amber light, each shadow stretching long across the walls like old wounds that had never fully healed. Michael sat across from Ethan, his gaze fixed on the man who had once been his brother, the only person he had trusted down to the bone. Between them rested a wooden table, and on it the USB lay motionless like an explosive device waiting to be triggered. Elena was not in the room. She had taken Jacob upstairs the moment she glimpsed Ethan's face at the door, and perhaps her heart, too, was not yet ready to confront the man who had locked away the truth for 3 long years. Michael did not immediately open the files. He sat still, his hand loosely wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, his eyes pinning Ethan as if searching for something hidden beneath that calm exterior. Ethan remained motionless, his fingers interlaced tightly on his lap, his gaze lowered to the floor, though the slow, deliberate rise and fall of his breath betrayed the storm churning inside him. At last Michael spoke, his voice low, quiet, yet heavy with the weight of stolen years. Why? Just one word. Nothing more. Ethan lifted his head, his eyes rimmed with red not from tears but from years of silence pressing against him. He met Michael's gaze without flinching, and when he finally spoke, his voice was a hoarse rasp scraped raw by guilt. Because I owed you. I owed my life. I owed your trust. And because I did not have the courage to make the right choice. He paused, exhaled shakily, then continued. When Vincent gave the order, I thought I could stop him. Thought that hiding Elena would make everything quiet again. But I underestimated him. I underestimated the shadow he cast. And I overestimated myself. I believed I could keep everything under control. But the moment you found out, I knew I had run out of roads. Michael tightened his grip around the coffee cup, the faint burn in his palm, the only thing anchoring him against the fury simmering just beneath the surface. He waited. He knew the worst part of the confession was still coming. Ethan rubbed his forehead, his voice dropping lower. I met Vincent again. 3 months ago. He is not dead. He never was. He only withdrew to wait. I thought he was gone for good. But no. He came back with a plan clearer, sharper, and more brutal than ever. I do not know when he started watching Elena, but he knew about Jacob, and he gave me 2 choices. 1. Help him erase every loose end, including you, so I could return as his second in command. 2. Die. Michael stared at him, a slow constriction tightening in his chest. And what did you choose? Ethan let out a hollow laugh, bitter as ash. I chose to hesitate. I pretended to cooperate but stalled for time. I could not betray you again. I could not betray the boy. And once I realized that, I started gathering evidence. I went to the cabin in the woods where he used to stay. I copied the hard drive. I knew that only when you knew everything, every truth, every lie, would you be able to protect Elena and Jacob. But I also knew that by doing that, I was choosing a side. And now, I have nowhere left to return to. Michael rose slowly and walked to the window, staring out at the garden where Elena had once found a bouquet of roses lying in the dark. His voice came out without him turning. "Where is Vincent?" Ethan answered, with the resigned calm of a man prepared for whatever would follow. "He is in Pennsylvania, in an estate rebuilt over the old underground system. No one goes in or out without biometric codes. He is waiting, only for a signal from me to ignite the entire compound if he senses a threat to his secrets. And to him, Elena and Jacob are the greatest threat." Michael turned, and in his eyes was no longer the anguish of a betrayed man, but the cold, steady fire of someone who had seen the true shape of the devil. He walked to the table, picked up the USB, slipped it into his coat, then looked at Ethan for a long time. "There is no road back for you, but you can walk forward with me. This time, if you betray me again, I will not kill you. I will let Vincent do it, and you know exactly how he would." Ethan neither nodded nor shook his head. He simply stood, his expression not fearful but accepting, as someone who had already chosen his path. When the 2 men stepped out of the house, the night swallowed them not to hide them, not to erase them, but to illuminate their choices. And in Ethan's eyes, for the first time, burned a fierce resolve he himself had not known he possessed. Fire crackled in a night over an abandoned patch of land on the northern outskirts of the city, far from the center and from the electronic eyes of the organization. Michael, Ethan, and Caleb stood around the flames, each man quiet for a different reason. Smoke rose in twisting streams of gray, mingling with the wind's hiss and the dry rustle of leaves crushed beneath their boots. They had burned every printed document from the USB names, codes, locations, photographs, transaction records, passwords, everything, but the single digital copy Michael kept hidden where no one else could ever find it. Caleb broke the silence first. He glanced at Ethan, then at Michael. "Now we have the list, the plan, the blueprint of Vincent's movements. But he is still behind walls we cannot breach. What are you planning?" Michael did not answer right away. He looked into the fire, its light flickering in his eyes like reversed sparks tearing through his thoughts. His voice came slow and steady. "I will make him leave a fortress. If I cannot break the walls, I will make him open them himself. And he will only do that when everything he built begins to fall apart." Ethan nodded grimly. "Then we burn more, not just papers. We burn what he worships." Caleb lit a cigarette, inhaled deeply, then flicked a burning match into the fire. "There are 3 warehouses still active under false names. 1 in New Jersey, 2 others in Kansas and Nevada. If we hit all 3 within 1 week, he will have to respond. He will not allow his assets to be destroyed without showing himself." Michael nodded. "But first, I have to get Elena and Jacob out of Chicago. They are not safe anymore, not even in the safe house. I have a cabin near Lake Superior, off-grid, no signal, no one knows about it. They will stay there." Caleb lifted his eyes, sharp and focused. "I can send guards, old ones, silent ones, men who once served Vincent but were betrayed by him. They will not switch sides." Michael gave a small nod. "Do it." Ethan stepped back a little, looking up at the dark canopy of trees before turning again. "There is something else I have not told you. Vincent is working with someone in the government. I do not know who, but if he pulls a part of the system to his side, when he falls, many will fall with him." Michael's hands tightened. "Then we make sure he falls hard. Not just falls, breaks." The fire flared as Caleb tossed in more old newspapers, its glow forcing their eyes into narrow slits. Ethan stood closer to the flames, letting its light wash across his face. For the first time in years, his face was no longer the shadow trailing behind Michael, no longer the man balanced on the razor's edge between betrayal and loyalty. Now it was the face of a man who had finally chosen a side, even knowing the path ahead would be made of blood and fire. Michael turned away from the fire, the wind snapping the edge of his coat. He did not look back, but his voice carved through the night. Prepare everything. In the next 7 days, every stone in Vincent's empire will explode, and when he crawls out from the rubble, I will be the first to look him in the eye, not to ask why, but to end it. Behind him, the flames continued to rise, and the smoke, once the thing that obscured truth, stood now as the silent witness of a declaration of war that could never be withdrawn. In the basement of an abandoned house on the outskirts of Joliet, the dim ceiling light cast a blurred glow over the wooden table where Michael had spread the last remaining files extracted from the hard drive. Each page was covered in names, identification codes, bank accounts, appointments, and locations encrypted with internal symbols that only members of the organization could decipher. Ethan stood beside him in silence while Caleb scanned line after line on his laptop, cross-checking each detail with the newly decoded data. Every name marked in red was another fragment of the chaotic mosaic Vincent Maddox had spent nearly 2 decades constructing, and now, with almost every shadow illuminated, one name still remained untouched. Michael pulled out an old handwritten letter tucked at the very end of the stack. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, clearly written in desperation. There was no signature, but the contents made it obvious that the writer had been someone on the inside, someone who had foreseen the coming purge and wanted to leave one final signal behind. At the bottom of the letter, a single line stood alone. The last keeper of the code is not in the system. He is Vincent's shadow. He is the final pair of eyes. Michael stared at that line for a long time, as if he were reading the history of his own life written back to him. The final pair of eyes. A man with no name, no file, no record, only a shadow. A blade resting at the back of his neck, one he had never noticed. Ethan stepped forward, picked up a photograph from the folder, and handed it to him. It was a covert snapshot taken at an auction in Philadelphia 4 years earlier. In the frame, Vincent was smiling as he shook hands with a tall, silver-haired man dressed like a politician, though his icy eyes belonged to someone who had seen too many deaths to ever fear them again. And behind him, nearly blending into the crowd, stood another man in a gray suit, his face indistinct but his eyes fixed directly on the camera. No one had noticed him then, but looking closer now, Michael felt his chest tighten. Those eyes, he had seen them before, not in files, not in photos, but in meetings, dinners, events that had seemed harmless at the time. Throughout the years when Vincent still ruled the underworld, the man had always stood there, unnoticed, unquestioned. A bodyguard, a driver, a logistics worker, he could be anything. But no one knew his name, and no one who might have known had lived long enough to speak of him. Michael sat down slowly, unable to look away from the image. Ethan asked softly, "You know who he is?" Michael did, not answer immediately. He closed his eyes, and memories surged like a film rewinding. One night long ago, when he and Vincent escaped an ambush by a hair, the man who drove their armored SUV through a blizzard had been this very shadow. Another time, when Vincent negotiated with partners from South America, the one who carried the briefcase into the room and vanished without a trace afterward, also him. He had no name. But he had a whispered myth that circulated quietly through the ranks. The whisper. No one knew the sound of his voice. No one had ever seen him angry. He did not kill with his hands, he killed with his presence. He was Vincent's eyes and ears. The final executor who existed outside all documentation, leaving no mark, no trace. Michael exhaled slowly, his gaze sharpening. If anyone held Vincent's biological key, it was him. If anyone knew Vincent's true location, it was him. Caleb looked up from the screen, tension roughening his voice. Where is he now? Michael rose to his feet, his eyes unwavering. I know where to find him. Then he looked directly at Ethan, and for the first time their eyes met without suspicion or bitterness. Come with me. If he is the final pair of eyes, then I will be the last thing he ever sees. Ethan nodded without hesitation. In the cramped basement, the fire in Michael's eyes smoldered like embers quiet, controlled, but capable of burning down an entire past. And from this moment forward, every step he took would be a step toward the end of a bloody era. The last shadow had surfaced. And he, a man once swallowed whole by darkness, would walk straight into it carrying fire. The sky over Pennsylvania had darkened into a curtain of black velvet, stretching across the horizon and swallowing every trace of life beneath it. And in that heavy stillness, an unmarked car tore down a narrow dirt road leading deep into what had once been an abandoned military outpost, now rebuilt into a modern underground estate where Vincent Maddox had retreated after faking his death and erasing every trace of himself from the world. Michael sat in the front seat, eyes unblinking, hands clenched tight around the steering wheel. Ethan rode beside him, holding the briefcase with the copied data and the device designed to break Vincent's biological access codes, stolen by Caleb's crew from one of Vincent's 3 hidden warehouses. Neither of them spoke during the long drive, because words no longer mattered. Only action remained, only the ending. The estate's gate emerged through the fog like a sleeping beast, silent but threatening. The automated identification system scanned the vehicle, responding to the forged signal they had prepared in advance, and within a few seconds, the heavy steel doors began to part, revealing the stone path descending into the underground structure. Michael guided the car forward, each passing yard weighing heavier on his breath as they neared the heart of the place where power and cruelty had once ruled unchallenged. When the car stopped, both men stepped out, each carrying a case. Though only one burden was truly heavy, the decision never to turn back. The main door opened by fingerprint, but Ethan was ready. He placed the decoding device on the panel, and after a short sequence of sharp electronic chirps, a soft click sounded like the house itself had granted them passage. They walked inside. No guards. No alarms. Only an eerie silence, as if Vincent had always known they would come and had been waiting. The long corridor, its stone walls cold and unforgiving, led to a final steel door that had once served as a control bunker, now reshaped into the private chamber of the man who had commanded an empire from the shadows. When Michael pushed the door open, the first thing he saw was not Vincent, but an old portrait hanging on the wall, an image of his younger self standing beside Vincent during an organization gala. The eyes in the portrait stared back like a whispered reminder. You were once the chosen one. Now you are the destroyer. Then Vincent appeared. He did not step out of darkness. He had been sitting there all along, in the center of the room, like an aging king stripped of his throne, but still holding the gaze of a man who had made thousands bow before him. His hair was grayer now, but his eyes were bright, and his voice slithered across the stone floor like a serpent. You finally came. Michael did not draw his gun. He only stared at the man who had been a mentor, a father in everything but blood, the man who had shaped him, then tried to erase him. He asked, Why? Vincent shrugged. Because you slipped out of my control. I thought you would be a better version of me, less ruthless, more calculating. But you grew something I could not allow. A heart. You let that woman ruin everything. And the boy, he is the anchor dragging you under. I gave you a chance. You refused. Now you come here thinking you can end me. Michael stepped closer, not thinking, knowing. Vincent let out a tired laugh. I do not need to live forever, but do not fool yourself into thinking you will leave this place. I set the kill order. When my heart stops, this room becomes a tomb. Ethan took the decryption device from the case and set it on the table. Not if we change the code. You control nothing now, not even your own death. Vincent fell silent. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed his eyes. Michael pulled his gun, but he did not aim at Vincent's head. He aimed at the chest, where Vincent's heart still beat with the last remnants of power. He did not want Vincent's final words to be a threat. He wanted them to be an admission. And when the bullet tore through the chest of the man who had been his father, his demon, his master, Michael did not blink, because he did not kill him for revenge. He killed him to end a curse. The room stayed still. No explosion, no alarms, only the fading smell of gunpowder and the final breath of a dying empire. Maddox had returned, but only to die. Inside the frigid chamber where Vincent Maddox had just taken his final breath, Michael stood motionless within the stillness that followed death. No alarms blared. No self-destruction sequence ignited the way Vincent had threatened. Nothing remained except the corpse of a decayed empire collapsing in complete silence. Ethan knelt beside the body, pressing 2 fingers to Vincent's neck to be certain. No pulse, no breath, no lingering threat from the man who had manipulated the world from the shadows for nearly half a century. But Michael knew well that the death of a snake's head never guaranteed peace. He pulled out his phone and opened an encrypted channel. Caleb's voice came through sharp, controlled, urgent. "I got the signal. Location confirmed. Is Phase 2 starting?" Michael did not hesitate. "Begin." Immediately, Caleb transmitted orders to 3 microsatellite teams they had positioned earlier, guiding strike units toward the last 3 underground facilities still operating under Maddox's name. In New Jersey, an underground warehouse filled with heavy weapons would be leveled within 3 hours. In Kansas, a covert biological lab posing as a pharmaceutical research center would have its entire database extracted and fed into federal investigation networks. And in Nevada, a crypto exchange hub used to wash millions in dirty money would have every account drained and every transaction made public on the dark web. Each strike was designed like a precise blade slicing through the final nerves of a dying monster, ensuring no regrowth, no resurrection. Michael turned to Ethan. "We have 15 minutes to get out. Once word leaks that Vincent is dead, the wolves that fed on him will come looking for blood." Ethan nodded and swept the remaining documents on the table into the fireproof bag he had prepared. He knew that even in death, Vincent had loyalists, men who owed him, men who lived by him, men who would kill to preserve the myth of his invincibility. When they stepped outside the underground estate, the night was just as dark as when they arrived, but the menace was gone. Only a heavy quiet remained, like a funeral shroud draped over the end of an era. The car sped away in silence. Ethan watched the trees blur past the window, then asked quietly, "So now what? We go back?" Michael did not turn. "No. We do not go back. We go forward. Phase 2 is not an ending, it is a cleansing. When the head falls, the hands still move. We make sure no one can lift the sword again." Ethan said nothing. He understood, and for the first time, he did not feel like a man trying to atone. He was part of a storm wiping away everything that had swallowed the people he loved. Michael tightened his grip on the wheel, eyes fixed on the faint band of dawn on the horizon. But inside him there was no sunrise, only a promise he had yet to fulfill. Elena and Jacob were waiting, and he swore the past would never, again, knock on their door. Phase 2 was action. Phase 3 would be freedom, and freedom, as he had learned, never arrived without blood. On a snowy hill near Lake Superior, where Michael's cabin hid deep within thick pines, Elena stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of gently simmering soup, while every nerve in her body listened for sounds outside. Jacob sat on a chair coloring a blank sheet with wax crayons, his innocent face almost surreal against the tension of recent days. He did not understand what was happening, only that his mother held his hand too tightly and told him that if a siren sounded, he must crawl under the table without a word. She had practiced that with him 3 times a day, like a ritual of survival. The wind outside shifted. Branches scraped against the windows like the past knocking to break in. The warm scent of burning wood filled the room from the fireplace, but a small sound too deliberate to be wind, too steady to be branches, made Elena freeze. Footsteps, not one set, several. She crept to the living room, pulled back the curtain just an inch, and saw them. 3 figures climbing the snowy path. One wore a black mask and a long coat, a gun hanging loose at his side. The other 2 had earpieces, listening to instructions from somewhere far away. Elena backed away, pulse hammering, then rushed to Jacob, whispering into his ear, "Under the table, sweetheart. No talking, no crying, no moving. Mommy will come for you." Jacob nodded, tears trembling in his eyes but not panicking. He had learned his lesson. Elena grabbed the handgun Michael had left behind, her hands shaking but her eyes sharp. She had promised no one would ever come near her child again. Not ever. She turned off every light, pressed her back against the wall near the entryway, where she had a clear line of sight to anyone who entered. The footsteps grew louder. The door was locked, but only with a latch. They did not try to break it. They burned it. The smell of gasoline seeped through the cracks like a warning. Fire flared on the front porch, pressing heat against the wood as if anger itself had been set alight. Elena retreated, threw a wet blanket over the side door near the kitchen, then grabbed Jacob from under the table and ran toward the back. But flames had already crawled across the rear exit. Smoke rolled in from the floor, sliding through the smallest seams, swallowing the air. She coughed hard, eyes burning, but did not loosen her grip on her son. A sudden noise erupted from the basement. The hidden door behind the bookshelf swung open. Ethan appeared like a specter, his face streaked with mud and frost, a long gun in his hands. "Come with me, now. No questions." Elena simply nodded, clutching Jacob as she followed him down into the basement. The moment the door shut behind them, gunshots shattered the cabin above. The intruders were in. Ethan led them through a narrow escape tunnel beneath the cabin, emerging into a weather-beaten shelter halfway down the slope, a place Michael had once built as an emergency route no one knew existed. By the time they reached it, the daylight had dimmed, and behind them thick plumes of smoke rose into the sky, the cabin burning like a pyre for the life Elena had tried to protect. But she did not look back. She held Jacob close, her only focus on his small chest rising and falling. Ethan contacted Caleb over the radio. "They found us. 3 men, 2 down. 1 escaped north." Caleb answered sharply, "I'll handle it." Ethan lowered the device and turned to Elena. "Michael is on his way. He knows." She nodded, tears spilling silently. Not from fear, she was long past fear, but from the unfamiliar feeling of not having to protect everything alone. Someone was fighting beside her now. The distant fire painted the sky red, a warning of battles yet to come. But the path ahead was no longer a doorway to hell. It was the road where every ghost would finally be confronted. Elena held Jacob's hand tighter, her heart steady. Fire could take the house, but it would not touch her heart, not ever again. A pale gray dawn settled over the cold pine forest, the thick fog draping itself like a thin morning veil around the small shelter where Elena and Jacob had escaped the night's inferno. The scent of smoke still clung to the air, though the flames had been extinguished hours earlier, leaving only faint columns of steam rising from the charred foundation of the cabin that had once been their final place of safety. Michael walked slowly across the carpet of dry leaves, his boots coated in mud and ash, his face carved not with the hardness of a crime boss, but with the raw, quiet relief of a man who has found his family again after surviving a storm that tried to take everything. He stopped when he saw Elena sitting on the wooden step, her coat wrapped protectively around Jacob as the boy slept in her arms. They were whole, they were alive. He exhaled a long breath, one hand pressing against his chest as if to steady the part of him that still feared this was only a fragile dream. Elena lifted her gaze at the sound of his footsteps, and in that brief moment their eyes met and spoke everything words never could. She gently laid Jacob on the small bed inside, then stepped out and wrapped her arms around Michael, holding him in a long, trembling embrace. As though 3 years of loss and agony had finally melted away into a nightmare fading with the morning fog. There were no tears, no accusations, only silence after the storm, a silence so deep it felt as if the world had stopped to let them breathe again. Ethan stood a short distance away, leaning against a tree, his gaze fixed down the narrow path leading toward town. He did not interrupt their reunion. Some moments demanded the presence of shadows, not people. Caleb approached from behind, holding a wrinkled sheet of paper, the final fragment salvaged from Vincent's files, a handwritten ledger, detailing the last anonymous financial accounts of the organization. He handed it to Michael, his voice low. "This is all that's left, and it's the final lead. If you want to end everything, this is where you go." Michael scanned the page, folded it, and slipped it into his pocket. But he did not respond immediately. He turned toward Elena, meeting the steady gaze of a mother who had survived terror and refused to be broken by it. She nodded, understanding that his fight was not done. But this time, he would not walk into the fire alone. "We go together, no more being torn apart." Michael rested a hand on her shoulder, then looked to Ethan and Caleb. They nodded as well. Each of them knew the storm might have passed, but its debris still lurked beneath the ground, waiting to rise again. They had to uproot all of it, down to the final poisonous stem, so that no new Vincent could ever grow from the ashes. An hour later, the group left the shelter. Jacob was secured safely inside the small armored vehicle Caleb had prepared, his head resting against his mother's shoulder as he slept. The road ahead was silent. No one spoke. Only the sound of tires rolling over packed earth, wind whispering through tall pines, and the quiet breathing of people who understood they were approaching the final chapter. As they took the last bend leading away from the forest and toward the open highway, Michael glanced back at the place that had once been a home and was now nothing but a heap of blackened timber. He felt no grief, because what mattered had survived: his family. In the quiet after the storm, something painfully real yet deeply alive stirred within him. A reminder that he was still human, still capable of choosing something other than violence, not vengeance, closure, final, unshakable closure. As the car merged onto the highway, a glowing green traffic light appeared at the intersection ahead. Michael sat behind the wheel with Elena beside him, and Jacob asleep in the back seat. Ethan and Caleb followed close behind in the second car, keeping enough distance to respond to danger yet far enough to let the rare peace inside the lead vehicle remain untouched. No one spoke. They simply moved forward, leaving behind ashes, blood, and years of grief. The green light was more than a signal, it was a symbol. One path had ended, a new chapter had opened. No more Vincent. No more organization. Only people who had once been victims learning to live as survivors, and those who had once been lost choosing, finally, to walk with their own true steps. In the back seat of the second car, Ethan watched the horizon, his hand resting lightly on a worn notebook filled with shaky handwriting. He had lived long enough to understand that not everyone who betrays is destined to remain a villain forever. Some falter out of fear, out of love, out of weakness. What matters is whether they rise again, whether they dare face the shadows they created. And at the end of this story, perhaps you, the one listening, have known darkness in your own life. Perhaps you have lost someone, been betrayed, or fallen because of a wrong choice. But life always offers us a chance to begin again. Like Michael, like Elena, like Ethan. They are not perfect, but perfection was never what made them human. The lesson of this story does not lie in bullets or explosions or secrets burned into the light. It lies in the way people choose when there is nothing left to lose, whether to keep hurting one another or to find a way to heal together. And in the end, light will always appear if you have the courage to step through the darkness. How does this story make you feel? Have you ever lived a moment like Michael's, when the past chased you until you finally had to turn and face it? Share your thoughts in the comments. We truly want to hear the feelings that sit deep in your heart. And do not forget to subscribe, like, and share this video if the story spoke to you. Our channel will continue bringing you simple but emotional tales, memories that reach the quiet corners of the soul, and perhaps, somewhere in them, you may find pieces of yourself. Thank you for listening. We wish you and your loved ones good health, peaceful days, and a gentle, fulfilling life. Farewell, and see you in the next video.